Hello and welcome again to Your Next Episode, where we promise to work through all the issues coming up for you as you burst into your 40s, 50s and beyond. I'm Amy.
And I'm Louise, and today we're talking to Jean-Claude Chalmet. Jean-Claude is a globally renowned psychotherapist, an author. He's a featured columnist at The Times and a founder of the Place Retreats in Barley. And we're at the Place London practice today to grill JC on parenting teenagers. So, hello.
Good morning.
Jean-Claude, JC, you said you don't mind which I call you, so I shall
Absolutely.
just sort of flit in and out.
I love the familiarity already. We're just going to be like, JC. I might just be calling you Jay by the end of this.
Why not?
When I was researching for our interview, I very quickly came across other people's descriptions of you as a person and as a therapist. And that was through articles and also testimonials. And the words that came up over and over again to describe you, and also the experience that people had having therapy with you, were warm, wise, nurturing, straight talking. You've warned me that you're quite blunt, and also non-judgmental. And the overwhelming feeling I have is that you really get what it makes, what it is that makes us human. So your personality clearly plays a big part in what makes you such a highly regarded therapist. But can you tell us, first of all, how you came to be one? Because that's not how you started out, is it?
That's correct. I mean, I think the reason why I became a therapist started very early on in life. I come from a very abusive background, emotionally, physically and sexually. And sort of by the age of 11, I read my first book on psychology, which was The Prodigious Adventures of Psychology by Pierre Dacour. And I was absolutely fascinated by the powers of the mind because I had run away the first time from home at the age of 9 and lived on the streets, and the second time at 11 and a half. And so it was very interesting for me what the mind was capable of. And so when I said at home that I wanted to become a psychiatrist, they told me that I shouldn't study for something to make me more crazy than I already was. Oh. And so I then had a choice on what to do. And it could be either engineering or economics. And I chose economics and became very successful in the city. But, having come from that background, I obviously suffered a lot of emotional trauma. And then I decided to do therapy for myself when I was 28, and I did quite intensive therapy, 2 hours of individual therapy and 6 hours of group therapy a week.
Wow.
And I did that for 4.5 years.
Wow.
I was very successful in business, whether it was, putting billion-dollar companies on NASDAQ, buying the Mir space station, doing the largest telecommunications deals in Russia. I was very successful, but I felt that I was always a fraud. I was always not in the right place, despite however successful I was. And sitting at a dinner in Athens, I met this amazing psychiatrist who told me quite bluntly over the table that she didn't understand what I was doing in business and that I was a born therapist. And that changed my career overnight, really, that I decided to go and train. And I trained with her and I studied and I did all what needed to be done. And then I worked in the practice there. And I came to London in 2003 to set up my own practice here. Okay. And so for me, it was a question of what is possible in life. How can we become the best version of ourselves? And I was in a way very fortunate, despite the very unfortunate beginnings in my life, that I was able to use all that experience to, one, understand other people, understand suffering, understand abuse, and understand that there is a way out. And I wanted to embody that and manifest. And I think that part of the reason why I am, if I may say that, as successful as I am, is that people, when they come to visit us, they can feel the authenticity of understanding where they are. I mean, I think if you have been through something and you sit in front of someone and you see genuine distress and suffering, and you can empathize and be there with them and see where they can get to through their experience, it instills a lot of confidence and a lot of trust. And I think one of the most important things is that to create a safe intimacy in the therapy room where people can then unfold and you can help them become the best version of themselves.
Yeah, that's human connection on a really basic level, isn't it? You know,
But isn't that what we all look for?
Absolutely, yeah.
I mean, the most important thing for me is human connection, because without it, we are completely in our heads. And I've always had the very strong belief that a healthy lifestyle is where the mind and the heart are connected.
Yeah.
You know, and I have this wonderful cartoon, which I have in my practice in Bali, which is a heart and a brain walking together hand in hand. And it says, you and I need to go to a place somewhere quiet where we can discuss and agree on things.
Yeah.
And, you know, very often in my practice, I find that people that come to see me are in their heads, totally and completely in their heads.
They
And so-
believe every thought they have and worship
Absolutely.
it rather than being able
Absolutely.
to detach from it.
And that's how they limit themselves all the time. And so when I teach them, you know, how to be more in their hearts and work with both parts, the emotion and the intellectual, then, you know, you see real change happening. So this is a very long-winded way of saying
No,
how I got to.
I'm just so
Really
glad
interesting.
you sat next to her, that lady at that dinner.
Yeah.
You could have sat next to anybody.
So I was going to ask you about the Barley Retreat and what your aim is as regards for the experience for people who come there. But I suppose you've sort of answered that in a way. But could you just explain a little bit about the Barley Retreat?
Definitely. I mean, I think it's very important that I wanted to create out of the practice I had in London, where I was seeing 45 to 55 people a week. What was very important, what I was seeing, that people coming once a week for 1 hour of therapy was sometimes not enough, because they were 23 hours and 6 days out there in the world, coping, trying to survive and trying to make sense of what was happening for them. So I decided very early on in my practice that I wanted to create a retreat, but it took me a long time to get there, to find the right place, to find the right shape, feeling that I wanted to give. And in 2015, I started with that. And the main principle of it is very, very simple. It's the same as what we do in the practice in London, but in a more intense way. And I wanted people to have the ability to be somewhere safe. So from the moment that they walk through the door, that they had the same feeling as if they come to the practice in London, which is it feels like they're in a womb and they're safe and they're held and they're contained and, you know, everything is fine and okay, whatever happens. And when they walk into the retreat in Bali, they get that feeling, but amplified because they are there 24/7.
Yeah.
And what we teach primarily, both in the practice in London and in Bali, is for how can people learn to contain themselves and become the best version of themselves. And our motto is be who you are. And how do you get there to being who you are? And for us, our philosophy, our therapy is that we teach people the adult version of them today to become good parents to the inner child inside them, while simultaneously learning to manage their internal critic, which is that voice that is chirping on your ear that tells you that you're not good enough, you shouldn't have done it, you should have done that, you're not wearing the right thing, look at your hair. You know, that voice that we all know, you know, that just chirps away in our
my
ear.
head right now?
Yeah.
And so, you know, the wonderful thing is that when people get that concept and they start getting in touch with the inner child, because I think that all our trauma, all our fear, all our anger, fear and anger for me are secondary emotions, and they are covering something that we dare not talk about, which is hurt, because we cannot show that vulnerability. And going into the subject that we are going to talk about today, I think that is particularly prevalent when it comes to parenting teenagers. We are so scared, we are so fearful of engaging in dealing, because what for me happens is they are having to deal with their own inner child that doesn't know what to deal. And sometimes I find people that come to our practice or come to the place retreats in Bali that intellectually they are their age or beyond their years. And it's fascinating. And then when I ask them, how old are you emotionally? And they look at me and they say, well, I'm not quite sure I understand your question. And I go, well, you know, intellectually you are older than your years, you say, but emotionally, how old do you think you are? And very often with men, I ask the question, since you don't know if I asked your wife or your partner, what would they say? They go, oh, well, very easy, 17 or 15.
Yeah.
You know, and so it's a very interesting concept when you have this, 42 or 45-year-old intellectual person with the mentality of a 15 or 17-year-old, and it can be both men or women. It doesn't, it's not gender specific. And so what's very interesting is when you have that differential, the person opposite them is expecting someone to interact with them, both on an intellectual and emotional level at that age.
Yeah.
But what do you do when you have a 42-year intellectual person that can reason it well and rationalize it way out of everything? But emotionally, you're dealing with a teenager standing in front of you, and you have children with that person.
Yeah.
What do you do? That creates a very big conflict already at the level of parents, but also in the workspace, also in marriages.
It seeps into every area of your life, doesn't it?
Absolutely. How many times have we worked with people that you think, oh my God, I mean, they're a child.
Yes.
Nightmare.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but intellectually,
there,
they can write the best PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah. Yeah.
And imagine that, regarding our subject of today, imagine that in the home with parenting.
Yeah.
How are you going to tell a teenager what to do when you yourself are still at that stage?
At that same level
And the teenager is looking for to be held and is looking to be counseled and talked to in a way that, they can move forward.
God, I know.
You
but
can
it's-
see, can't you,
yeah.
why, and you're just describing those all those events coming together, and that's why it's just a hothouse and just so stressful
It's a
for everyone.
tinderbox.
Yeah.
It's a total tinderbox. And I can also understand the parents that are feeling, lost and, because it's not their fault
No.
that they were emotionally stunted at a particular age. But what we are doing, because we are recreating a trauma in the teenager, we're just repeating
The cycle.
the cycle,
Yeah.
generation after generation after generation. And that is something in my own limited way I would like very much to help with.
It's interesting, isn't it? Obviously, I'm not an expert. I just have my own human experience on this planet. But it's like you were saying before when we got here. We don't want to scaremonger anybody. Obviously, these are just circumstances that happen behind every front door. But you were saying before, and it's so simple. The key to unraveling this. I mean, it's hard work. It's work, but it's
Communication and love. It's, and I don't think even the most hardened criminal, when you show love, they become softer. They might not become, total lambs, but when you show genuine
Compassion.
love, compassion,
Yeah.
empathy, understanding, they become softer. And, it's very difficult for me to imagine that your own child, your own teenager, how did they come to the stage where you find it very difficult to be with them? This was not a process that happened overnight. Very often, as we said at the beginning of this conversation, they are already there.
Yeah, our audience now, let's assume that there's no point saying to them, well, you should have sowed these seeds when they were children. Let's just assume that they're already, they're just there, they've loused up somehow, maybe in some ways, like we all have. I'm not saying that in a judgmental way.
There are no perfect parents.
No.
They're
No.
just human parents, and we will all make mistakes.
Yeah.
Whether we like it or not, even with the best intentions, and you can read every book on parenting, we will still make mistakes because that is part of the learning experience and also part of the beauty. Because, I think that a parent that doesn't make mistakes is terribly boring.
How, JC, do you switch it up when things have kind of the pressure cooker has gone, maybe something's kicked up, doors slammed, maybe there's some event that happens. How do you stage your own intervention?
I very often counsel parents just to knock on their children's bedroom door, ask permission to go inside, even if it takes you to knock 10, 15, 17, 20 times. Go and sit down in the room and don't say anything. Just sit with them, and they will rage, and they will scream, and they will shout, and they will be silent, and they will test you in every way possible. But eventually, they melt, because what children want, no matter what age they are. They want 100% of your love. They want 100% of your attention. They want 100% of your energy. And that's where in families things sometimes go very wrong, because very often children feel that between siblings the attention is so divided that the only way that they can get the attention of the parent is through negative attention.
Right.
And I always counsel parents, we know that the energy is there. Why don't we try to switch it around from negative attention to positive attention? And you do that through a reward system. So when the child behaves negatively, you don't interact. But when the child behaves positively, seeking the attention, you go all out.
What if you've got 3 children and one of them is the one that is always kicking off? And how do you, because it would be very easy, I would imagine, to be focusing all of your time on that child that is always kicking off, always causing tension and friction in the house. If you've got a couple of other kids that are quite sort of just getting on with it, not, quite sort of low maintenance, for want of a better word, what things would you need to be watching out for there?
The child you are referring to that is kicking off and slamming doors is one with an internal conflict and is in a lot of pain.
Right.
Now, if that child had anything physical wrong with it, the entire family would rally round, would take them to the doctor, to the hospital. They would be around them. There would be nothing that is too much in order to bring them back to normal physical good health. But when it comes to mental health, everything is seen as problematic. And people are so scared of it that they prefer to do nothing rather than do something. Imagine if a child had a pain with a broken leg or a broken arm. Nobody would say, just let him go to his room and deal with it. But that child is in pain. That child has a traumatic wound. And you might say, I'm not a therapist, I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a mental health worker. No, but you're still the parent. And for me, what I did with my own children, in those moments, I always saw them as if they were very little and they were fighting against something that they couldn't deal with. And it was not up to me to give them advice, but I wanted them to know that I was there for them. And I very often said to my children, listen, to tell you the truth, I don't know what to do. I really don't know what to do. I have no idea what to do. But I just want you to know that I'm here. I have always loved you. I love you. And I will always love you. And maybe we can figure out a way together to go forward.
That's a good place to start, isn't it? I mean,
being completely honest. Earlier you were talking about some parents being scared of the confrontation that might happen. And but actually, if you put it like that, like I don't have all the answers, but I love you. What, really, how much confrontation can come from that?
And I think the most important thing, Louise, is when you tell your children, I have always loved you. I love you. And I will always love you. Those, for me, are the most magical, impressive words to a child, because that's what they want to hear.
I'd like to move on to the questions that we've been sent, and lots of them were very similar, so I've chosen the ones that echo what the other ones were asking. One of them was, how can we set boundaries when they are met with anger and create huge conflict?
I think what we should always remember as us, as the parents, because we're of the age that we are, most of us are parents, is to remember that when there's met with so much anger and so much pushback, that anger, for me, is always a secondary emotion. So it means that there is a lot of hurt underneath there. Now, if you looked at your child from a place where you know they are hurting, would you still react in the same way as when they manifested through anger?
Right.
Just take, for me, the two emotions, secondary emotions that represent hurt are anxiety and anger. How would you react if your child displayed anxiety? You would have a very different reaction. Yet, at the same time, they're expressing their hurt.
So I suppose it comes back to communication. So I read that as if somebody were to, let's say you say to your teenager, right, you have to be in bed by 10, you've had a discussion about it, everyone's agreed, you're going to start heading up the stairs at 9:45, we've had a nice discussion in a non sort of
violent way.
And then it comes to it, and every night you're going, come on, you're supposed to be getting ready for bed, and they kick off and get,
But I think you forgot to mention, so in that negotiation that you were talking about,
so
were there any, when you set the boundaries, have you discussed with the child and agreed what the consequences are going to be?
Right, okay.
Because I think it's one thing to agree with them boundaries.
Right.
But choose together the consequences, because then the child can say very little. Because in achieving their extending the boundary, there is a consequence.
Right.
And I think this is very important. And if you feel that your children are very confrontational, I think it might even be a solution to write it down and you both sign it.
Right, okay.
Because I think that's very important. And then the child has very little, because the parent then becomes angry and then sets a punishment or sets a consequence that the child is even going to disagree more with.
Yeah.
And there's going to be more anger.
Okay.
And then the parent feels totally lost. For a lot of parents, they set consequences and they start watering them down.
Yeah.
And the moment you do that, the child has learned, I can agree to any consequence, but I can then water it down.
Oh, yeah.
If you have really challenging children, because some of us as parents, we do have very challenging children, is there anything wrong with inviting a third person or a professional person to learn to deal with it? Because, I find this always so anomalous that as parents we are expected to know what to do at every stage of the development of our child. Who are we? We're just ordinary human beings that are trying to do our best.
And would that need to be someone that your child would need to agree to that?
Always.
Yeah.
Always. Because this is a family negotiation. How are you going to teach your children to be respectful of someone else's wishes if you don't respect theirs?
Yeah, of course.
And they might say no, and I don't want this, or I don't want, okay, in which case, what do you want? I want nothing. But, the thing is that you just keep on asking in a gentle way. You don't lose your temper, because that gives him the example that they can lose their temper too, because they are, forgive me for using that term, but they are little monkeys. They are going to imitate everything we do, because where else are they going to learn from? And I think I want to come to a point which is for me always very important in terms of parenting. I think that we talk about the hurt that exists in the child, but I think it's also very important to talk about the hurt that exists in the parent from their own childhood. But the wound is exacerbated when the child becomes a teenager, because before that, the external validation for the child comes from the parents. That's just how it is.
Yeah.
But at some point in their development, they change because they want the external validation from their peer group or their friends. And all of a sudden, us as parents become redundant. And it triggers in us the fear of rejection and the fear of abandonment. And those are two very powerful forces that feed our inner critic with absolute gourmet meals.
Yeah.
When we feel that we are not necessary, we are surplus to requirement. And again, our children know and sense that in that moment, they have 100% of negative attention with us. And they go for it. And they milk it for everything that it's worth. But the truth is that we're supposed to be the adult. Even if intellectually we are 42 and emotionally we are 15, we are still required to be the adult in the room. So I hope that through this podcast, for instance, that people start realizing, oh, I mustn't buy into this. I mustn't start competing with my child in terms of negative attention or anger or shouting or screaming or disruptive behavior, because you will never win it.
No.
They will always know how to get to you.
They hold the power at that point, don't they?
Absolutely. Rest assured that your children always want to feel loved. They always want to feel that they are important. And I think these very violent reactions is seeking reassurance They're not setting out to hurt you or to upset you or to make you feel terrible. Your internal critic does that for you. Don't you worry. But what they want is they want to feel loved and cared for and reassured and having your attention and knowing that you're going to be there no matter what. And they're testing you. And you have a choice. You either fall in the trap or you are actually the adult in the room, even though you might be hurting so badly in that moment because it triggers a lot of stuff inside you. It might tap into a well that you have already inside you. But your child is not responsible for that. It is your responsibility as the adult to do something about that. But if you are going to hold your child responsible for tapping into a world that already pre-existed, I'm sorry, you're on the wrong path.
Yeah, of course.
Get a grip of yourself.
I like that absolute bluntness and straight talking and not sugarcoating anything.
It's hard, isn't it? Because I'm sitting here as a parent to an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old, and I know that this episode is about parenting teenagers, but I think to myself sometimes I kind of get ready to go into battle with my 8-year-old and I'm kind of like, I can't lose this one. And I'm scanning forward 10 years, 8 years, 10 years and thinking,
You don't even have to go that far, 4 to 5.
Okay.
You'll be there.
Like this evening. I don't even need to go that far. If I carry on in that mindset, I'm imagining I've not set the foundations very well for being able to have a...
But you should maybe ask yourself, how comes I'm setting these foundations? And ask yourself, what foundations do I want to set? What kind of a mother do I want to be to my children when they are 10, when they are 12, when they are 14? And if I think about it, I remember my oldest son one day saying to me, my dad is my best friend. And I said, I certainly hope not. And he was very offended because it was in front of his friends. And he said, how could you embarrass me like that? And I said, well, think about it. When you were 7, Frank Lee was your best friend. When you were 11, Jan Brus was your best friend. When you were 14, Bob was your best friend. When you were 19, Alain was your best friend. I'm your dad, and I'm always going to remain your dad. I'm your parent. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think this whole notion of, as a parent, being the best friend, I'm not entirely sure that is a correct way to see your relationship with your child, because they will only ever have one mother and one father unless they are step-parents, and that's a whole other story. But, it's really very important that they have that particular relationship. But for the parent, I think it's extremely important that they actually define themselves what kind of a parent they want to be. If you could say, by the time my children are, 8 and 12, I would like to be the type of mother that, like this. And so I'm going to work on myself to be that time. But even with teenagers, what kind of parent do you want to be when they are 18?
Yeah.
What kind of parent, what kind of relationship do you want to have with them when they are 22? Yeah. And, it's never too late.
No.
It's never too late.
Good.
Because children will respond amazingly well when they see that you want to make changes in order to have a better relationship with them. Never expect miracles overnight, because obviously they will have had a long history of dysfunctional behavior, perhaps in the family, or antagonistic behavior, because every family has stories. So I think it's very important that we are aware of that.
I'm hanging on JC's every word, but it's almost like there's a crane outside who's determined.
I hadn't even noticed the crane because I'm just listening
for us
like
not
that.
to improve our relationship with our children.
I've got some other questions here. Somebody wrote in quite a long one. How can I tackle school-college refusal? It's impossible to physically make a 6-foot teenage boy get out of bed if he's point-blank refusing. Been to the school, tried everything. There's no bullying at school. He just hates going and knows that there's nothing she can do about it.
What happened to the bucket of ice-cold water?
Do you think? Okay.
If nothing else works, you need to shock their system. I'm sorry if that sounds maybe offensive to some people.
But do it with compassion and love. Tip that bucket on their sleeping heads with compassion.
The thing is that, sometimes you need to shock your children. What do you do with children that start using drugs.
Well, that was another question. Somebody was also saying about they know that their daughter is smoking a lot of weed, alcohol, experimenting with other drugs, determined to try anything and everything. So,
well, I would say write to a rehab center and say, look, I'm facing this problem. Can I come in with my daughter? And let them talk to people that are actually trying to get off it and what has happened to them. Because I think that everything happens so much in a vacuum that people do not experience reality anymore. It becomes all such an intellectual concept. But if you put a 13 or 14-year-old in front of teenagers that are in rehab and that they can see what is happening to them, and that could be them, then they have a choice. They have a choice of, do I want to be that? And they can say, oh, this will never happen to me. That's what all of these young people said in their time. And I think we need to experience that. I mean, I never said to my children that they couldn't use drugs. I never did. But I did bore them to death with telling them what each drug would do to their nervous system, to their parasympathetic nervous system, to their sympathetic nervous system, to the capillaries,
to their hair,
to their cardiovascular system, to their brain, and they were absolutely bored to death. There's no point in saying, don't do it, because that will just instigate them to do more. If you have a child that is, trying everything, great, try. But can I just show you where you can get to?
Yeah.
And I think you need to experience that, because now you're not making an informed choice.
No.
You're just making a choice that you don't even know what the consequences could be of your choices.
Yeah, that's like really simple. It's not complicated. It's not true. But why don't we think of that in the moment? Because we're just eaten up with our own, that just triggers everything. They're taking drugs. We're scared. We're anxious. We're.
Well, I mean, the thing is, Louise, that we are consumed by fear.
Right.
And when we are consumed by fear, there's very little space or very little place for love. Conversely, when there is love, there's very little space for fear.
Right.
And I think we have to be very aware of that. For me, there are only two positions in life: fear and love. So whenever I'm in a position of fear, I try to go into a position of love, because the perspective becomes very different. That's why I use the example. If you see your angry teenager stomping off, slamming doors, screaming and shouting, and of course that is the image that you receive, and that your amygdala and your limbic system receives in your brain. But if you could stop for a moment, in that moment, because that triggers your fear response, fight or flight. But if you could stop yourself and think for a moment, my child is in terrible pain, would you still have the same reaction? Would you still want to scream and shout and punish them? When you think, my child is in such pain, hurting so much, am I still going to shout at him? Am I still going to punish him? Or what do I want to do as the parent? Do I just want to be there and hold them, which of course I wouldn't advise with a teenager that is, in full-fledged thing. But just, that's why I made the example of sitting in the room, that they know you are there.
It is all quite simple, really, isn't it? But it's understanding it, and and then putting it in action.
Well, I hope through your podcast people will listen and actually stop for a moment and say, wow,
yes,
I never knew that actually when my child is behaving like that, it's actually their way of expressing hurt and vulnerability. And I can actually tailor my response as the adult in the room, as the parent, in order for them, to respond to what their real need is. They might not even know it themselves. No. But if I respond in a different way, instead of mirroring them, then I might get a different reaction.
Yeah. I had a few people asking about concerns around their teenagers eating, not eating enough, body image.
In general, what we see in eating disorders, it is because their minds get overwhelmed And it's a way of taking back control.
Right.
And we should remember that. If my advice would always be to any parent, the moment that you suspect that there might be an issue regarding food, whether it's anorexia or bulimia, would be please go and see a professional. You are not equipped as a parent to deal with this. No amount of restricting, bullying, whatever it is that cajoling that you're going to do is going to help. It is a terrible beast that goes on into the minds. Of course, social media and peer group pressure plays a very big role in it. But overall, the child is so overwhelmed in their minds. They're so flooded by all the thoughts that they have, that the only way to take control back is either through restricting food or self-harming. And it's always a way of numbing the pain. Self-harming is numbing the pain. Eating issues are to get back into control, because that's the only thing that you can control. Not to eat, or restricting or getting rid, purging the food. So it's always about the control mechanism.
Right.
So your advice is don't let that slide. You need
Nip it in the bud.
Yeah. As early as possible.
Yeah.
But what about general girls just being very, not just girls, boys as well? They're looking on Instagram. There's images that they're seeing that are really unrealistic, but put a lot of pressure on them to look a certain way, act a certain way. How would you suggest counteracting that?
I would always suggest the same thing, communication and love.
I knew you were going to say
because, the child is obviously looking for something.
Searching out,
Searching for something that they don't have. And they need a compensatory mechanism for the hurt that they're feeling inside of the lack of. One of the very interesting things is that most addicts start their addictions in teenage life.
Right.
Because they learn to use something in order to numb the pain, and something that they can derive pleasure from, be that alcohol, drugs, gambling, internet, sex and love, whatever it is. But they learn that. And so our whole mechanism in the present day world is to treat the addiction, which I think is about the wrongest formula that there can be, because we are not prepared to look at the emotional trauma that lies underneath. And part of the success of our clinic in London and in Bali is that we always try to get to the root cause, because then the symptoms fall away.
Right.
Or they become much easier to handle. And I would say the same thing as a parent. Don't look at the anger. Don't look at the anxiety. Look at their secondary emotions. Look at the hurt underneath. What is your child hurting from? And why do they feel too vulnerable to express their hurt or their vulnerability? How did you teach them? Did you tell them that when they were angry, when they were small, look at you, you can't be angry, you look ugly, that's horrible, Children are going to be angry. They are going to express frustration. Let them, and even if you didn't do that when they were 4 or 5, let them do it when they are 12, 13, 14, 15. It's never too late.
No.
And children will respond very well. Even teenagers, even young adults, they will respond very well.
I'm thinking probably actually all of us respond well to love and
kindness and understanding and compassion.
Even us old carcasses.
Yeah, I know.
Crones.
The next thing I wanted to ask was about step parenting. What somebody has sent here is step parenting help. So tricky, especially at this age. It was teenagers, and I expect for the next few years I have to come, especially with a toxic ex. Not all decision making is mine. There's lots of things there. So
there's to eat and to drink in that, isn't there?
Yeah.
But I think the problem here becomes more complicated because there are many facets to it. That first of all, if there are toxic exes involved, they will fight you through the children, and the children imagine, become the punch bags and the negotiators and the middlemen and the brokers between the adults, who already most probably don't know how to behave with their toxic exes. They most probably have this huge differential between the intellectual age and the emotional age, and then they are using the children. And if that triggers the well inside you that was installed through your own childhood and the parenting that you receive,
myriad of pain,
I mean,
isn't
it is just impossible. And I think we need to be able to stand still, take a step back, and remember, no matter what the toxic exes are doing, this is not the child's fault that there are toxic exes involved. And we should always remember that we are holding these precious lives in a stewardship for a number of years. And what is the best thing that we can do? Are we going to fight back the toxic ex through the child? Because then we're just as bad as the other side. Or are we going to remember that these are very vulnerable, very tender, very fragile young people that we have brought into this world, and that we carry a responsibility for, and that we should try, even if we don't succeed, but at least try to overcome the fact of what our own wells are and the toxic exes, and think of the position of the child in this, and always go by that principle, that we have a temporary guardianship, and we choose what kind of human beings we make out of them. And again, it's about love and communication. And I may say something very dicey now for many people, because we so often expect with children that if we do something for them, that they're going to repay our kindness. But for me, that's an investment. If we really act out of love, then we do what we do because that's what we want to do, and we do not expect any returns. I'm always so humbled and so honored that people would come to me to divulge all their inner turmoil that is going on. So I'm extremely respectful of that, for a start. And then to be able to work with someone, because I always say the same thing, I'm only ever the technician. You are the one coming here. You are the one that is making that commitment. You are the one doing the work. You are the one that is making the change. I'm only helping you, either peeling off the layers of shit that have been installed over the years, or I'm helping you to bring out the person that you really want to be. So it has actually very little to do with me. Yes, I might be helpful and instrumental in what they are doing, but at the end of the day...
You can't do it for them, can you?
Exactly that. So,
but you can facilitate that learning, that understanding,
yes,
so that they can...
Which is actually very simple.
Yeah.
As you've heard today. It is a very simple process. And I repeat, for me, for any parent, I would always ask of them, how are you with yourself? How do you parent yourself? Because no one can give you back your youth. That's gone. But perhaps I can teach you to be a better parent to yourself, learning to manage your inner critic. And this way, you will automatically become a better parent to your children. Because it's a ripple effect.
Yeah. I feel like we've only scratched the surface, and of course the dynamics are distinct to each family and to each individual involved, but it may be that just one person hears something that they needed to hear today and connects with that. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share the little I know.
The little you know. And all Jean-Claude's details will be on the show notes, along with other resources mentioned here today. So please take 5 minutes to rate and review the podcast, and get in touch with me or Amy via social media. All our details are in the show notes too. Thank you, Jean-Claude.
Thank you.
Made by darkhorse.digital.co.uk. Shooting, live streaming and podcast production. Hello, this is Rich Wilson, host of the podcast Insane in the Membrane, where we talk to funny and interesting people about men's mental health. People like James Acaster.
Because we won't talk about emotions because we think that's bad. We won't talk about feelings, think that's bad. So they've had to rebrand it and go, it's mental health. Yeah,
mental.
Our brains are so, yeah, I'm pretty clever. Okay, I'll get into my mental. Yeah, I like puzzles.
And Rob Beckett.
I've never even done a school play. I did some open mic gigs, did the Edinburgh Fringe, somehow got on the telly, and I'm on the other side of the world in the jungle doing nights. Following Ant and Dec.
People like Mark Steele.
I hated being at home and I didn't get on with me mum. My dad was in an asylum by then. I suppose we ought to talk about that, shouldn't we? Given the premise of the podcast.
Search Insane in the Membrane from wherever you get your podcasts. Brand new episode.